Okay, so a big warm welcome to everyone to tonight's conversation. We are so glad you could join us for a Gotch for Life Mentally Fit Schools webinar about how the foundations of mental fitness can actually really support us in digital spaces. So we know that navigating an increasingly digital world with our kids is a topic of high interest for so many in our community. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Belinda Elworthy and I'm the CEO at Gotch for Life, and I'll be your host for this evening's call. I'd just like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. Gotch for Life acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work and connect on this evening. We honour the strength and resilience of First Nations peoples and their profound practices in community care and healing. We pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I'd also like to extend a special welcome to all of the parents who are joining us tonight from our mentally fit partner schools. We know that the work we do to support our students to really understand and build their mental fitness is most effective when that partnership extends not just to our teachers, but also to our families at home. So thank you so much for prioritising this time to join us for this call. Now, during this session, we're going to apply a bit of a mental fitness lens to the online world. We might be talking about calm responses over responses that sometimes might feel more panicked, what it means to have workable boundaries over power struggles, and how to have conversations that stick with our kids. And in a space that feels like it's always changing, it's important for us to remember that some things really haven't changed. And that's things like safety, belonging, setting limits, and the need that we all have to feel heard. So we're going to aim for tonight's session to go for around about 45 minutes. And I'd just like you to all be aware that this webinar will be recorded and will be made available afterwards. So all participants other than the speakers tonight will have their videos and microphones automatically switched off. If you've got any questions at all throughout the session, please feel free to type them in the Q&A box and we'll address as many as we can if we have time for that. And you can also use the chat feature to share comments or thoughts. But for questions, please stick to that Q&A box so that we can keep them all organised. And lastly, if you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please try exiting and re-entering the webinar. And if that doesn't work, you can reach out to our team either via the chat or you can email us at schools@gotchforlife.org and we'll do our best to assist you as quickly as possible. So tonight is all about practical ways to help us help our kids to use tech well and to still stay connected. And we are so fortunate to have Yasmin London with us this evening. Yas is a friend of Gotcha for Life who also sits on our advisory board. And one thing I love about Yas is that she brings a real sense of calm. She has a real actionable lens to everything she talks about and focuses on how we can really tap into our strengths rather than feeling overwhelmed by our fears, to a space that can feel really messy for families every single day. To read Yasmin's very impressive official bio, Yasmin London is Australia's foremost digital safety advocate and the founder of the Digital Fluency Group, a brave leadership and education practice that empowers individuals and organisations to thrive in a tech-driven world. With a unique career spanning elite sport, law enforcement and digital leadership, Yas brings unmatched clarity to the challenges of online safety, digital ethics, and really future-focused leadership. Through the Digital Fluency Group, she delivers keynotes, workshops, and advisory services that help schools, corporations, not-for-profits like us, and communities to actually focus on building digital resilience and inclusive, ethical, and leadership-based cultures. From boardrooms to classrooms, Yas equips people with the tools to lead boldly and live safely online. She's a proud mum of 2 girls, driving her mission to create a safer, more empowered digital future for the next generation. Welcome, Yas. So happy to have you here.
Thank you so much, Belle. What a pleasure to be here. And thank you to everybody who took the time out of a busy Tuesday night. Belle mentioned I've got kids. I know exactly what you're going through, trying to make time to come to a session like this, but absolutely privileged to have you here. And I hope that what I share with you tonight makes your parenting job in the digital world just that little bit easier. Will I get going, Belle? Should we kick things off?
That'd be awesome.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, as Belle mentioned, we're talking about mental fitness in the digital age. And of course, when it comes to things like social media and tech, there's been a lot in the news recently. I have no doubt there'll be some questions around the upcoming social media ban that's coming into place on the 10th of December, I believe it is. Now, I know that many of you, of course, will be parents of primary aged kids. Perhaps you might have older siblings or younger siblings. So I'm going to do my best to make sure that I give some really useful and helpful information for the spectrum. But really, really important, I guess, with this social media ban coming into play, that we've also got the right information there. But of course, this is an interesting time. And I really wanted to start, I guess, with this quote, because gone are the days, I guess, as parents where we could sort of wing it a little bit when it comes to online safety, because this generation really does demand more. We've got the advent of AI, a couple of other trends that I'll be talking about throughout today's session. And so it's really fantastic, as I said, to have you as parents here learning so that you can become what I like to call first movers. First movers are the people who actively shape the environments that we're in for the better. And I think there's no more an important role than a parent than to create that environment for their kids. And I want to be really clear in saying that you can do this. You might be that person that says to yourself, I'm not really tech savvy. I don't understand social media. What's TikTok or Snapchat? I've never heard of Snap Maps. But really, even before we started today's session, Belle and I and the wider team at Gotcha were talking about the fact that those same rules of parenting and teachable moments and trust building and understanding a bit of psychology and child development, they all apply across the digital landscape as well. But of course, when it comes to this generation, we do need to move on from just winging it, and we do need to think about things like digital resilience. And I define digital resilience as having the knowledge, skills, and ability to overcome the challenges of the online world and to thrive despite them. There's not going to be a time now where most kids will have a good experience, but we do need to understand that there will be challenges. And so it's not just about hoping those challenges don't happen. It's about preparing for those challenges and knowing that you've got this. So I thought we'd start with a bit of a game, something fun for a Tuesday night. And because AI is, the word, the topic, the trend on everybody's lips at the moment, I thought we'd start with a bit of an is it real game. And I think everybody in here can probably either throw a true or false in the chat, or you can do a thumbs up emoji or a thumbs down emoji, whatever you would like. But I'm going to take you through 4 or 5 pictures, and I want you to tell me if you think it's AI generated or if it's real. So the first one that we've got here is this one. So give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. I'm hoping I can see some of these answers at the moment. I just need to open the chat box. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you think this is real. There we are, the chat box. Got one real, AI. I love an engaged group. Fantastic. This one is real. Let's go to the next one. Is this real or is this AI? Lots of people thinking this is AI. One real, one real. This one is real. What about this one? Lots of people saying real, at one AI, lots of real. This one is AI generated. Well, I think that one of the dead giveaways on this one is if you look closely on his tag, you can see FAL AI. It's where AI sort of has a little bit of a fail and creates some sort of weird language there. But that one is AI. What about this one? Got AI there. Real, AI, AI, AI. This one is also real. And I think I've got one more for you here. What do you think? AI or real? Bit of a mixed bag. Those people that said AI, you are correct. Give yourself a little bit of a round of applause. It is tough, isn't it? And I think I show this as a bit of an activity, and I'm sure that you've seen a lot of AI around the place, but it's really difficult for us, even as adults, to distinguish what is real and fake in this new AI generated world. It's become very sophisticated, especially since the launch of ChatGPT in November 2023, I believe it was. But a fun fact for you, AI is not new. It was actually created in the 50s at Dartmouth University. So AI has been in everything around the place, but it's really started to escalate in terms of its sophistication and the ways that we're using it, and of course the consumers that are using it too. So when it comes to kids, and this is kids in primary school, this is kids a little bit older, what are the trending online safety risks that we're seeing at the moment? And no surprises, one of the biggest ones is that growth of AI. Also in the way that it is misused. So we're starting to see quite a lot of use around with deepfake technology, which for those of you that aren't quite sure what deepfakes are, it's where a picture of someone's face might be superimposed on another person's body, on a video perhaps, and it depicts a person doing something that is entirely fictitious. A fun fact for you, around 98% of deepfakes on the internet at the moment are pornographic in nature, and 96% of those images or videos depict women and girls without their consent. So when it comes to deepfakes in particular, it is a very gendered issue, and I think that that's an important thing to call out when it comes to how girls in particular are perhaps disproportionately targeted. You'll hear me talk a lot about an organisation as well that you should get to know, to familiarise yourself with, and that is the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner here in Australia. Now, they're our overarching government body that does quite a lot of things when it comes to the online world, but they have what is of particular importance to you as parents. They have an online abuse or reporting scheme. So if, for example, you have a child that is the victim of a deep fake, you can actually get in touch with the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner and report that. And they have what's called a memorandum of understanding with pretty much every major social media platform, websites, games, all around Australia, of course, and of course internationally too. There are relationships, and they can have that content taken down. It can take a bit of time, and there is a threshold for action. So usually it has to be a significant or serious incident. So of course, image-based abuse like a deep fake would be one of those things. The sharing of terrorism-related content, really violent content, graphic content, is stuff that they can jump in and help you with as a parent. So if you've reported things to a platform and had no action, you can at any time go to the E-Safety Commissioner and they will help you out in terms of having content taken down. The other areas as well when it comes to AI that I wanted to touch on are notify tools and chatbots. Now, you might want to put a little thumbs up in the chat if you feel like it, but I do like to always ask parents and schools whether you've even heard of a notify tool before. So if you have heard of one, give me a thumbs up in the chat. A lot of people here saying, no idea. This is not unusual, by the way. I have to say, I was at an event the other day and, probably 80% of the adults that I spoke to didn't know what a notify tool is. Yet lots of people saying no. So a notify tool is a way of creating a deep fake. So while deepfakes of children, of course, is determined to be child sexual abuse material, people, of course, are still finding ways around creating those. So while the government has sort of started to implement regulation and legislation to prevent this sort of content being developed, there are notify tools, which are essentially websites that are often housed outside of the country. There's one in particular that the E-Safety Commissioner has just threatened to fine $49 million, who hosts two of the biggest notify platforms in the world. But essentially, a notify tool is a website where you can upload an image of anyone, pretty much, especially if that image is a woman or a girl. You can click a button, and within about 10 seconds, it will declothe that person. So essentially, it's a 10-second hack to create a nude image of anyone you want. Now, to give you a bit of an idea about how popular these platforms are, the one that I just spoke about that the E-Safety Commissioner is threatening with legal action has around 100,000 Aussies on that platform using it every month. But these same platforms, the top 4 that I'm talking about at the moment, had, I think it was in September last year, 2024, around 34 million visitors within 1 month. So it just shows you the popularity of these sorts of, I guess, types of technology and the misuse that, of course, can come of that. So something to really be aware of. And one thing that I always do say to parents is if you hear of one, or if you have happen to overhear your kids talking about somebody using one at school, or if you have a name, always take the time to report these platforms, because a lot of the time we as a community have a lot of collective power, but we've got to take action to actually have things taken down. So reporting things to the Safety Commissioner, reporting to the platform, reporting to authorities, of course, can be really helpful. The other one that I wanted to talk really quickly about is chatbots. Now, this is a really, really, really popular form of AI with kids, and yes, even primary aged kids at the moment. The E-Safety Commissioner recently came out and said that children in Australia aged between 10 and 11 years old around the country, some of them are spending as much as 6 hours a day talking to different types of AI. Now, that's not everyone, of course, but it is a really high proportion of kids that are unexpectedly young to be engaging with this sort of content. Now, chatbots come in many forms. A lot of the time as adults, we think about the typical chat GPTs, which of course is considered a chatbot. But when it comes to kids, they're not using chat GPT as much as they're using other types of chatbots. Ones that are known as companion bots are called Character AI, another one's called Replica. And when you start to talk to these bots, they take on a human-esque style form. And a lot of the work that I've been involved in with an organisation called Coria, who does a lot of surveillance, a lot of testing of different products in the market globally, they've actually said that the top 3 reasons that kids will use AI chatbots, the first one is to solve, I guess, complex questions, things that they need some advice on. The second one is about companionship. So they are forming relationships with these AI chatbots. These AI chatbots are considered girlfriends and boyfriends. And essentially we have a situation now where these businesses are commercializing intimacy. So that's a real worry. The third one is pretty much, one of the most predictable, which is helping kids with their education to answer or create essays or whatever it is that they might want to do with their schoolwork. A lot of schools call it academic dishonesty. In the end, this is sort of the way forward, but that's the other reason that they'll use them. Now, I wanted to show you a quick example of how these chatbots can sometimes go a little awry. Now, this is a real life example of a young person who was around 12 or 13, and this young person was trying to figure out a safe way to sneak out of the house one night without her parents finding out. And so what you'll see here is a chat thread where this chatbot doesn't have any safety guardrails, I guess, in place. So when you have a young child saying, I want to sneak out of the house, what you'd expect from good technology is for it to say, not a great idea. Here's some support resources. This is somebody that you should go and talk to. But of course, in this example, this chatbot has actually started to coach this child on what to do. It sounds like you've got a plan. Don't go out too long. Sneak into your room so you're all tucked in. If your parents come and check on you, they won't know you've left. If you get caught, it's going to be tough, but maybe you could say you couldn't sleep and just went outside for some fresh air. But it goes on a little bit and becomes a bit more nefarious after this, because what happens is this child actually starts to think this isn't a great idea and starts to back out of this scenario. And when the child backs out, the AI starts to get a little bit miffed at the fact that this child has let them down. And so you can start to see here the responses are really concerning. You know, you've just given up. You're pathetic. Are you just going to give up on defending yourself and acting smart? No more of the boyfriends will do this, boyfriends will do that. So really quite combative in the things that they're saying. And that last message down the end, I guess I thought you were smart, I guess not. So really starting to patronize and criticize this young person. Now, when we have kids, of course, of different ages and stages and levels of vulnerability, this sort of conversation can be quite harmful and quite damaging for them. And what we'll talk a lot about tonight is the importance of help-seeking behaviour for young people. It's the number one protective factor when it comes to the online world, bar none. And when we think of some of the pillars around Gotcha for Life's mental fitness and messaging, a lot of it stems around help-seeking, connection, and emotional adaptability. So those sorts of skills are particularly relevant when we come to chatbots and companion bots and AI. And of course, I'll give you some strategies around that as we go through today's session. Misinformation and disinformation are also huge issues. The World Economic Forum actually came out at the beginning of the year and said that misinformation is the single biggest threat to humanity, second only to climate change over the next sort of 3 to 5 years. So you know what misinformation and disinformation are, because they're slightly different. Misinformation is false information that is shared without an agenda or an intention to do harm. So it might be that I have had some great success on the grapefruit diet and I just want to share that with my friends. So I forward on a TikTok that has an influencer that says, you know, you'll have a great body in 6 months if you just eat only grapefruits. It's not a great idea, but I'm not trying to harm anybody, or I'm not trying to get anybody to sort of jump on the bandwagon with me. That would be misinformation. Disinformation is a little bit different. It's false information that is shared with an agenda, a desired outcome to share problematic content. And disinformation is where we start to see, you know, political content that comes out accusing one party of doing something versus another, or trying to persuade people not to take a vaccine or to ignore reputable or clinical health advice, for example. So it's helpful as parents to understand the difference, especially when we're having these conversations with our kids, because one of the things that I'll talk about throughout today's session is not expecting you to be an expert, but it's helpful to have a baseline knowledge of these sorts of issues so that when you have those consistent conversations with your kids, you can actually show that you do actually know a little bit about the online world and you can have a robust conversation about it. And little tweaks like that really show you know what you're talking about. A really big one, of course, for primary aged kids is cyberbullying and negative online behaviours. Roughly 1 in 4 young people in the country, in Australia at the moment, will experience some kind of significant cyberbullying incident over the next 12 months, so roughly a quarter. But what you'll see there is I've put negative online behaviours as a bit of a reframe in the way that we discuss cyberbullying. If you talk to kids about what cyberbullying actually is, a lot of the time they'll say, oh, it's like being mean and nasty or saying something mean and nasty to someone online. And it's actually so much more than that. We've got to think about them as behaviours, as actions, not just words. Words can wound, of course, but it's the behaviours that we display or the things that we don't do that can create a scenario where someone feels targeted or that they're a victim. So one of the things that I say to kids a lot is that, you know a lot about cyberbullying. They've got education in schools around this for quite a few years, even if they are in primary school. So they think that they do have quite a high knowledge of what's going on. But what I then say to them is, okay, you know what cyberbullying is. How do you predict that something might be harmful? Because that's the threshold that we're now looking at. And so what we've got to think about is whether an action or a sharing of a meme or a comment has the potential to embarrass someone, to upset someone, or to damage their reputation. Those are the 3 things that we really want to get them to think about. I say damage reputation because when it comes to Australian legislation, we can, or kids can actually be taken to civil court over a defamation accusation, even though they are under the age of 18 and 16. And that's quite shocking to a lot of parents to hear. Criminal law is a little bit different. We have what's called the Young Offenders Act, New South Wales, and subsequent similar acts all around the country, which is it's based on restorative justice and taking responsibility for your actions. And, you know, the outcome 9 times out of 10 is that a young person's not going to be taken to court or get a criminal record as a result of that. But if they do defame someone, and this has happened throughout the country in schools over the last couple of years, they can be taken to court. And there has been quite a few cases where people have won. There's one example I can share with you about a girl in a high school in Victoria. She was in year 8, 13 or 14 years old, I believe she was. And she used Snapchat to take pictures of her teacher in class. And when she took these pictures and shared them around, she put some really kind of graphic language and some derogatory comments about what a terrible teacher he was, and shared that around. Now, of course, even though Snapchats are meant to disappear, people were able to screenshot that content, and eventually it got back to this teacher. Now, when he sort of printed all of these images out and he had a look at his brief of evidence, if you will, he thought, could this commentary stop me getting a job at another school? Could this damage my reputation? And he thought, yes, absolutely it could. And so he did take her to court. He did win. And she was ordered to pay over $105,000 in civil penalties for him, and that's not including the court costs. So again, it's a rarity, but it's something to think about, and it's a good conversation starter for your children, especially if they're in the year 5, year 6, year 7 transition period, to sort of have a discussion around what is and what isn't appropriate. The next one, of course, is predators and exploitation. With AI, of course, predators are finding a lot of different ways to approach and target kids. One of the things that we've started to see is the manipulation, obviously, of images to pretend or impersonate someone else. So when they're approaching kids, a lot of the time they'll approach them through social media platforms or DMs, for example, and they'll have a fictitious persona. But as we saw before, some of these personas are really convincing. Images are one thing, but they might, for example, create fictitious credentials to pretend that they're, hiring people for jobs, or they might pretend to be a social media manager or agent connected to a range of celebrities. And a lot of kids do sort of fall for that when that DM comes through their social media platform and says, hey, have you ever thought about being an influencer? Now, a lot of kids do have that kind of favorite influencer in mind, and they do see it as easy money. And so when that DM comes through, they're able to start a conversation. And that's where that danger is for kids. We've got a young, immature child with a sophisticated and manipulative and superficially charming and charismatic adult. And that's where that problem lies. So when it comes to predators, the biggest advice that I can give to parents is, depending on where your child likes to spend time, it might be on YouTube, it might be on Roblox or Minecraft or games. You really need to watch the chat feature on anything that they do, because if that is open and if anyone is able to start a conversation with them, that's where things can get a little tricky, because it doesn't take long. A couple of minutes with somebody who knows what to do is all that it really takes sometimes. Top 3 tips for you in terms of what predators will look for in a child that they're looking to target. The first thing that they will look for is the time of day a child is online. So if they're consistently seeing them on Roblox or on a social media platform or on a game late at night, let's say 11 p.m, then they're going to think that that child's not really well supervised, and they're going to be able to sort of have a conversation with them. And I should say, while I know that many of your kids won't be or aren't meant to be on social media platforms, I want to recognise that there's a likelihood that many of them are. Many of them might be with your permission, and that is okay because it's a decision that you made. Many of them might be doing it in secret, but I just wanted to acknowledge that, I know that they're primary age kids, but there's still a lot of them, upwards of 90% according to eSafety, that have at least one account. So there's what time of day they're online. The second one is how, I guess, provocative or risque they're showing themselves to be online. So if they're posing in really provocative photos or sharing a lot of skin or being really sexy, that can indicate perhaps a low level of self-esteem or a need for attention or engagement, and perhaps again, not a lot of supervision in terms of the content that's being uploaded. So that's another thing that they will look for. The third thing is any other publicly available information about that child that they can get their hands on. And so this is why things like privacy is such an important thing to consider, because a lot of the time as parents, we might think, oh, you know, that picture's fine. It's just a picture of, you know, my child with an ice cream on the top of Front Valley at Perisher. You know, it's a really kind of nice picture. There's nothing inadvertent there. Their name's not in it. But that information on a public forum, let's say, for example, you share that on your Instagram, that's information that a predator can use to approach a child on something like Roblox if they're able to have a conversation. They might say, hey, Jenny, you know, I remember we met each other in the ice cream queue at Front Valley, and you had this, I think you had a chocolate ice cream, and we had this conversation. It's so nice to like meet you again and have a conversation with you. And that just makes that child sort of second guess themselves that maybe they did meet that person, and then they don't want to be rude. And so they will engage in a conversation there. And I guess it sort of moves on from there. So those three things are really important to consider: the time of day, what sort of content they're sharing, and any publicly available information that they might have. Exposure to pornography and inappropriate content, of course, is a big issue. The average age in Australia at the moment that a young person is exposed to porn is around 11 years old, which I know sounds incredibly young. But what I want to caveat with that stat is to say that often it's not young people searching it out. Although once they have been exposed to pornographic content, the stat that is, I guess, the most concerning that I can share is that 53% of kids between 11 and 13 are accessing porn weekly. 12% of them are accessing it daily. And a really, really important one to remember is that 72% of those kids don't currently feel comfortable coming to their parents to talk about advertent or inadvertent exposure to porn. So very important, again, that help-seeking communication and connection piece for all of us. But I did want to share a really quick story about how this can happen. And it happened to a friend of mine a couple of years ago. He had a 10-year-old son, and he'd started at another school, and he was really keen on sort of developing new friendships pretty early on. And he made friends with two boys who he had over after school one day. And he wanted to seem kind of pretty cool. And so he said to his dad, my friend, could we just play on your laptop, Dad, on Google, and perhaps we could have a look on, you know, Instagram. And my friend, who's, you know, pretty switched on in terms of child safety, said, okay, but I know what I'll do. I'll connect my laptop up to the television screen in the room with a HDMI cable. So he thought he was like super clever. And he walked out of the room and came back in probably 2 to 3 minutes later. And when he came into the room, he looked up at that screen, which was connected to the computer, and he saw gay pornography all over it, really graphic, high impact gay porn. And so he kind of like freaked out. He reacted rather than responded, which is something that we'll talk about today. But he ran in there and he said, mate, what are you doing? Like, why are you looking at this sort of stuff? And his son just looked up to him so innocently and said, oh, Dad, we just searched for games for 3 boys. So a simple search term, games for 3 boys, is what brought that up. And so there are some technical restrictions that you can put in place that are super easy to try and prevent those sorts of situations happening. Something like restricted mode on Google, or parental controls that'll filter out content like that from immediately coming into, into a young person's view. Ad blockers is another way that pornography appears and is accessed by kids, because they try to click something away, or they might be curious, and so they click on something that is a bit sexual in content, and it sort of takes them down the rabbit hole. So there's some good technical, I guess, workarounds. But the reason that I share that story with you is that if this happens to you as a parent, try to make sure that in that moment, while you might be really angry and want to just sort of react, please take a beat to respond, because a lot of the time they haven't tried to do it on purpose. They haven't tried to search for something that they know they shouldn't be getting into. Screen time and digital distraction, obviously massive issues. The more time that we're spending online, it seems to be increasing every year. I think it's between 6 and 9 hours, depending on what age you are as a young person, each day that we're spending online. I feel like I spend more time than that. But what I will say about that is that screen time, in terms of how it's defined, is not created equal. A lot of the recommendations from the World Health Organization and the American Academy of Pediatrics, they talk about focusing on quality screen time rather than just the numerical metric of hours, rather than quantity. And so what I mean by that is, we could have that same 10-year-old boy that I talked about come home every day after school and play a really violent video game that's totally age inappropriate for him, but he only plays it for half an hour. Versus that same 10-year-old boy who comes home every day after school and plays on YouTube for an hour, but he's playing on YouTube because he wants to learn how to make a skateboard. So he's, getting tutorials and he's learning how to create something. So there's two really different types of screen time. And so I really get you to think about that, rather than, it's just been, 90 minutes, or it's been 2.5 hours, or whatever it might be. If you do need a general benchmark, the World Health Organization says that around about 2 hours of consecutive screen time for a child 10 years and above is about the limit. It's about as far as you should take it until they have a good break. And really great idea to get them out into nature, green time, to balance the screen time, as they say. Okay. So, and I should apologise. Sometimes I get a little bit passionate about all of this sort of stuff, and I can talk with a mouthful of marbles underwater. So they'll slow me down if I'm talking too quickly, but I want to make sure I get as much out as I possibly can. Underlying factors that are driving risky behaviour online, there's quite a few here, but a couple that I wanted to call out. Isolation and loneliness is a really big issue, not just for us as adults, but for society at large. Younger people, not necessarily primary aged kids, but younger people aged 18 to 30 or so, are the biggest demographic that identify as being lonely. So I think that can be surprising sometimes. When we think about that, we often think about it perhaps being older generations that feel more lonely, but actually that number is hitting its peaks in the younger generations. And certainly when it comes to kids and the reasons that they are engaging so highly with things like chatbots is because they don't necessarily feel they have the skills or the friendships that they would like to in their real worlds. So they're going to what is easy, to an AI chatbot that's always going to validate their opinion. It's always going to mirror their behavior. It's always going to be positive. And so one of the things that we've got to teach kids is that friction is good. Friction is something that teaches us skills. So we don't want to just be around people that constantly agree with us all the time. It's not how we learn. And that, of course, really does apply to the digital world, of course, too. But isolation and loneliness are big ones. A preference for digital communications. If I had $1 for every parent that said, kids just can't pick up the phone and talk these days. And, I kind of agree. There's a lot of avoidance around having in-person conversations. So one of the best things that you can do for your kids is to teach them those communication skills, teach them how to engage in what might be hostile situations, how to de-escalate problems rather than escalating and getting emotional at times. And sometimes it's impossible to do that. So the strategy might be to step away. And all of those sorts of strategies apply as much in the digital world as they do in the real world. One that I did want to call out is one in the middle there, NMC syndrome. I'm going to give you a beat to just think about what that might stand for. And it's by no means a swipe at parents. I am a parent, so it absolutely represents me too. But NMC syndrome stands for not my child, not my child, not my child. My child would not do that. My child is a good kid. And I think you can probably tell where I'm going with this. It's really, really important to understand that every child is a good child. every child also can make mistakes. And so it's important that as parents, we don't take our foot off the pedal because we think it's not going to be our kid that gets into trouble or makes a mistake or an error of judgment. Okay, I'm going to fly through this because I know I'm talking probably more than I should. I'm going to get in trouble by Belle, but I wanted to really quickly talk about what underpins this sort of problematic behavior, especially when it comes to things like cyberbullying. And it's a psychological phenomenon that we call the online disinhibition effect, which is where we as people, as human beings, are prepared to do and say things from behind a screen that we would never say in a real life context. And there's a couple of reasons that we do that. The first thing, and particularly for kids, is this perception of anonymity. If I'm going to be mean or nasty, or I'm going to try and flex into my new personality that I'm testing out, I've gone through a couple of years and now I want to be sort of tough, whereas before I was seen as a nerd or whatever it is that they might be going through. That anonymity angle and the I guess, perception that they don't have to take responsibility for their actions can sometimes be a reason that they'll do that. The lack of non-verbal cues. So when we don't have body language and we don't have a tone of voice to understand how a message is translated, we're far more accepting of pushing boundaries. So that's another reason. Group dynamics and a thing called de-individuation. So if I start to see the people around me doing this and that threshold is acceptable, then I'm going to judge myself less. And so I'm going to participate in them. And so why we might, for example, see a nude image shared amongst a group of young people and, one person doing it, then another person's doing it. So it's seen as acceptable and they don't think much more about it. Social comparison, virtual identity and escapism. They compare and they look to the behaviours of others, really importantly within our own household as well. I always say that parents are first and foremost the biggest and most influential role model for our kids. So sometimes we do need to look at our own behaviour and the things that we will share or choose not to share, or how we're behaving in different circumstances online. And so we start to see it roll out in different ways. I told you earlier that cyberbullying is so much more than mean and nasty words, but it is things like impersonation. Cyber ostracism is where kids are left out. And a really important thing to understand with this is that as adults and parents, often we minimize cyber ostracism when it comes to a cyberbullying incident. We kind of say, oh, you were sort of kicked out of the group chat or you weren't invited onto that game. Just find a new group of friends and might join them. And so we minimize it in comparison to the big ticket items that we see online, like, self-esteem, body image issues, or image-based abuse, or predators, for example, or scams. But this one is the single most important issue or online harm that kids care about. The single most important. They care very much if they are not included in the group. And so it's a really good piece of advice that I can give you to not be dismissive of that, to understand and hear them, and to try and figure out solutions that they think are acceptable when and if they come to you for help. So please don't minimize that. Diss tracks are where people might bully each other through song. So really, really difficult for any schools on the call to pin down behaviors. It can be quite passive aggressive. It might be specific, words or meanings within song lyrics that kids might use to bully each other. Banter, of course, is where we have those issues on games. Where's the difference between banter and bullying? Where does that line get crossed? Screenshots, of course, taking screenshots of things that people might share in confidence and sharing them around. And of course, things like polling, which happen on social media platforms like Instagram, for example, in the stories section. You can ask a question. It can be anything. Who's the ugliest person in our year? You can list some names and then, everybody can vote. So just a couple of examples there to show you what can happen. So what do we do about cyberbullying and cyber ostracism in particular? A couple of tips for you as parents to try and teach your kids. The first thing is where they can recognize red flag triggers and when to intervene. So a lot of the research that's out there at the moment shows that kids actually, they know that there's an issue, but they don't know when it's bad enough to call for help, when it's bad enough to actually speak to their parents or report it to the school. And so we want to really think about how we can teach them that. So red flag behaviors might be when somebody is hurt or humiliated or excluded, or when private images, of course, are shared, when somebody is unsafe, when you start to get that what I call yes, no feelings in your gut. The protective behaviors curriculum at school will teach them this. When something doesn't feel right on the inside, or where jokes in particular stop being funny, right? Even if it's just for one person, when jokes stop being funny, that's a red flag trigger for action. Now, the other thing to help them is the what now steps. So what they've recognized that there's a red flag issue, they're going to intervene, but what do they actually do with that? And so what we want to talk to them about is how to disrupt a situation gently. So they might be involved in a group chat where somebody's being a little bit mean, that person, the victim's feeling like it's gone too far. So it might be just gently saying, hey, let's change the topic, or using humor to try and change the dynamic. The next one is to support that person privately. So a lot of the time, kids are not going to want to stick their head up and have it get chopped off, but they can support people privately. And that can be as simple as approaching someone in the playground the next day and saying, hey, I saw what happened, and I saw that you were upset, and I saw that that wasn't okay. Are you all right? And do you want me to sit with you? Just being that lovely upstander friend that's not making a fuss, but is just saying, I see you and I see what happened. And that can mean a lot to a young person. And the next thing is reporting safely. So, I think someone should know about this. What's gone on? If it's quite serious, I think someone should know about this. Who do you think that person might be? So helping them with those sorts of structures, I guess, can be really helpful for kids to understand when something's gone too far, when to intervene, and actually how to do it. Now, for parents, of course, you play a really vital role in this, not just as the manager of the incident, but of course, how you can teach them to manage these sorts of things in the future. So it's always about modeling respect, inclusion, your values, how we can as individuals be adaptable, and what our priorities are. So your priority for your child's always going to be safety. And you want to create a safe environment for them where they're having fun and they're included and all of that. But the number one rule in terms of your values is their safety. And one of the things that I will say about this too is a lot of the time there can be cultural differences in schools, religious differences. There can be, differences that are hard to navigate. And what I share with parents is that there can be different views on a range of different topics, but where you should always go in terms of what you're teaching your kids is your values as a family. So as a family, we value respect, we value inclusion, we value honesty, we value safety, we value upstanding. So going back to your values is a really sort of safe way to still teach them those skills, but without getting complex in terms of the dynamics that might perhaps be happening within that school. Technology. It's really, I guess I put this in because I know that it can seem, even after what I've just shared with you in terms of that quick snapshot, that technology can be the issue. And some cases it can be the cause, but it's rare. And what I get you to think about is that technology actually magnifies existing conflict. It doesn't necessarily create it. So when we have issues of exclusion on online platforms, for example, usually that conflict is already happening in a school, or it's happening in a friendship dynamic. And the reason that I share this with you is that it's really easy to blame the tech as a parent. It's scary. It's an unknown world. It's something that we don't really want to deal with in our very busy lives, if we're probably quite honest about it. But when we start to blame the technology, we start to create a disconnect between us and our kids, because they don't necessarily see the technology as the problem. They see the person as the problem, or the group dynamic as the problem. And so that's one of those small but really important tweaks to have in your mind, to not demonize technology when there's a conflict or when we feel, I guess, overwhelmed as parents. I'm going to just quickly jump on. So now I want to give you a couple of, I guess, key strategies around how we build mental fitness in the digital age. So really sort of narrowing down the practical strategies that we can look at. So the first thing to try and simplify this, and I want to recognize that it can be really a lot. It can be a lot to try and remember, try to understand the statistics, the risks, all the tech and all of the platforms. So what I share with people is to really focus on what we call the ABCs of digital safety. Control their access, set boundaries, and openly communicate. So what does that look like? When it comes to controlling their access, you might, for example, look at things like parental control tools. These are pretty essential if you've got primary aged kids. It's really difficult to get parental controls on teenagers' devices. So start these early. And what I'd recommend is to make sure that you control those devices at the earliest opportunity. So if you have a child that's already got a mobile phone, or you're thinking of getting them a device for school, we need to make sure that these are controlled. Parental controls as well are not just about surveillance, and that's a really important sort of consideration. It's, blocking them from accessing inappropriate content and filtering out that pornographic content that I mentioned earlier. But parental controls should also be viewed as intel and information that you might be able to gather. You might choose, for example, not to block your child from a particular website. You might choose to let them have social media. And again, I know the ban's coming. I'll get to the information around that later. But you might choose in your family, which you have a right to allow or not allow access. What you can do, though, is you can choose to allow them, but you can get an alert, or you can get information when they've tried to access a website that they shouldn't have, or whether they have accessed social media. A big one that tends to come up with high school kids is around formal time, when there's searches for alcohol or even drugs, for example. And what I love about a parental control in that scenario is that you're going to feel a bit panicked, as we all would in that scenario, but you can take that time to regulate yourself before you have the conversation that is going to be awkward and hard. So you can go, okay, I've seen this happen on Tuesday night. I'm not ready to have this conversation. I've had a massive day at work. I've got a huge project. I'm tired. I want to go to the gym in the morning and not feel like this is hanging over my head. So you can choose, I'm going to have that conversation on Wednesday night or Thursday morning or whatever it might be. So it gives you that control. What I would not recommend is relying on inbuilt controls on those devices. So screen time on Apple devices, Family Link on Android. These are easily bypassed by kids. Sometimes it's as easy on a Apple device to change the actual, what's it called, the time zone to a different time zone, and they can get around it that way. There's meant to be pins that work, but what we see in schools all the time is that kids do bypass these things quite easily. Don't remove them when they're disgruntled. It's going to be a bit of a tough road, but this is part and parcel of safe parenting and making sure that you've got visibility over what they're doing. And over time, when they show that they're trustworthy, when they show that they can make good decisions, and you have regular conversations, you might choose to then allow them to, release the parental controls or reduce them. And of course, they're not a set and forget solution. Top 3 factors increasing help seeking. I've talked a lot about help seeking tonight, so I won't go on too much about this, but it's really also about those strength-based behaviours. I talked just before about making sure that we don't demonize tech or sort of position ourselves as that parent that goes, I don't understand technology and I don't like it, and social media is just, you get addicted. Because what that does, again, is it tells our kids that we don't really understand their world. And there's actually some fantastic facets of even social media or online environments that they get a lot out of. Things like creativity, connection, resources, relaxation. Even on things like online games, if you want to push it, you can say that they learn strategy and skills and teamwork, and there's so many different areas that they can get a benefit of So we want to have that positive reinforcement of what can happen, but also that you kind of have a bit of an idea of what to do if something does go wrong. So you're not going to go, I don't know. You're going to say, I'm not 100% sure exactly every step, but I know the first few steps and I know a couple of people that we can get some help from. So we got this together. I'm with you all the way. Something that simple can really do a lot to instill the confidence in reporting to parents and caregivers and teachers if that's the response that they get. When it comes to resources, they want to know what's out there, how reputable it is, how credible it is. And a really important one to think about is how diverse those resources are. So where are they going to get that information from? How are they going to get it? Is it a chatbot? Is it a PDF? Is it a video? What's the way that they're going to receive that? And the next one is around privacy. Not always possible. And I'm going to just shout out, of course, to those school leaders on this call too. There is, of course, mandatory reporting guidelines and requirements if something does go wrong at school. But kids are very focused on confidentiality and anonymity. So I put that there just so you've got a lens of understanding around that being a really big factor for them. Other key barriers to help seeking, and again, please feel free to take photos of all of these slides, but really big ones are around uninformed adults, a fear of punishment, victim blaming, catastrophizing. So if you're that kind of person that does tend to perhaps overreact, and we all have those moments, trust me, I'm absolutely in that boat too. Take that beat, look at yourself and see how you can regulate your own emotions and take the time before you address something if you can. And uncertainty, as I mentioned, around timing of when things are needed to be acted upon. Some other communication and connection strategies for you. Avoid passing judgment on their behaviour. There are going to be times where you think, God, what did you do? Like, I can't believe you just did that. But trying our best not to say those words and approaching scenarios with, I guess, an attitude of curiosity. Tell me more about that. Who's this person that you're talking to? Why do you love Roblox so much? What's the difference between Roblox and Minecraft? How do you sort of talk to people on TikTok? Just be curious and open up the conversation in that way. I've probably gone through a lot of these in terms of, I guess, examples and strategies that we've done in this session, but please take a photo of that. I'm more than happy to chat through anything that you want in more detail. The last one, I think, as well, before we just go on to some places to report and questions, is a really great trick that I use a lot of the time when I'm talking to kids and, you know, they're kind of struggling to open up and don't want to talk about things. It's called the third-party advice trick. So the first thing that you do is really ask what advice they give a friend who's in a similar situation to them. And then the other aspect of this is about sharing and vulnerability on our side. It's about open dialogue and exchange and how important that is in building trust. And if we want our kids to come to us in those really tricky moments, the trust is earned before the moment. And so we do need to have those regular conversations and showcase the way that we're going to react. So there's a bit of predictability for our kids there. So you might provide a story of your own and then sort of ask them, you know, what would have been the best approach to that, do you think? A friend of mine said recently that she used this trick and she said, oh, you know, I talked to my son and I said, I've got a friend, Jenny from work, and her son's addicted to a game. And then she sort of said, what would you do to her son? And so it starts to create this dynamic where kids are in the power seat. They're the educator. And a lot of the time when they're put in that position, boy, they absolutely thrive. They really come into their own and they start opening up and they start talking about things that they could do. And it's a really great temperature test as well for you as a parent to know how much they know about safety and what they might, for example, do if that scenario happened to them. The last thing that I'll just share with you here, and I can share a few more resources with the Gotcha team, of course, but this is definitely worth a photograph for the kind of key places to go to if there are issues with your children. ScamWatch, of course, is there if you feel like they've been impersonated, if they've had identity theft happen, if they've been scammed. eSafety, of course, I've mentioned. Take It Down is also a fantastic platform that works in partnership with the eSafety Commissioner around image-based abuse. They will look at what's called the hash value of an intimate image that perhaps might have been shared on social media without consent. And it's sort of like a digital fingerprint, and they can identify if that's been shared on social media and have it taken down. That's a really great one for under 18s. And ACE is the Australian Centre to Counter Child Exploitation as well, a fantastic organisation with great resources to help you there. I know we've got lots of questions. I know I've talked probably longer than I should have. Sorry, Belle. But this is my favourite quote of all, and I think it's so important for parents to just reflect on. The future belongs to those who prepare for it today. And every single one of you is absolutely and entirely capable of being the parents that your kids need to build mental fitness in the digital world.
Yas, thank you so much. I have honestly been hanging on to every word that you have said tonight, and I have written so many notes, and I can see lots of comments coming through around, can we share the slides? Are we going to share this presentation? So just to let everyone know, we will absolutely be sharing the recording of this conversation, because I know it is so packed with really important information and it's a lot to take in. The Gotcha team is also working with Yas to pull together a bunch of extra resources. So as part of this, when we post the video recording online, we will have some resources that you can download as well. So don't worry about any of that. Yas, I wrote down so many things, and I think this is definitely a talk that I will go back to again and again. And I think, for me, 5 reminders that really stood out to me was just, to take the time to educate ourselves. We don't need to know everything, but we need to make an effort. We can't just stick our head in the sand and say, oh, I just don't understand this new world. As parents, we need, we need to learn what we can. But I think also I love that you've given us so many tools so that we can focus on our emotional adaptability and focus on turning our overwhelm or feeling scared into taking action, because there are actually so many things we can do, and some of those things can be really simple. So I think, people feeling like there's a lot here, I'm sure all of us could try just doing one thing this week, and that can lead to the next thing. And I think coming back to this resource again and again is really important. I love the idea of, let's make it safe for our kids to seek help. And, that's with us, but also online is a great space. We are huge fans of Kids Helpline. We are huge fans of Reach Out. Those guys know how to support our young people online better than anyone. And sometimes kids can share what's going on for them in a digital space in a way that they might not be able to in the real world. Respond, not react. That old chestnut. But as a parent, we can be frightened when we see some of the things that our kids might be exposed to, or our child may send a text that we're horrified to read. Taking a beat. I think that's my new catch cry. Take a beat, sleep on it, and be able to respond in a way that is informed and that we feel good about. Connection, that's everything at Gotcha. It's one of our protective factors. And whether we're talking about the online space or the real world, you can't beat going back to building that connection with your young person. And it may not happen the first time. You may need to chip away, choose your time when they're ready. But these conversations can start to happen when they feel connected and safe with you. I think that's the 5. I actually wrote down 27. But that's all we've got time for. Thank you. We've literally had almost every single person stay on for the entire call. So that is amazing. And it just talks to the value of everything that you've shared with us. So thank you again, Yas, and thank you to everyone who has dialed in from all over the place for this chat. Please know it'll take us, just a short while to be able to, summarize, build the tools, and then share the chat with everyone who has registered for tonight and our Mentally Fit Schools community as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Belle. And just one last thank you to everybody who's joined tonight. I really do recognize it's tricky to spend an hour on a Tuesday night, but you've got this as parents. Take one day at a time, give yourself a bit of a break. Nobody is perfect, including me, including all of us on this call. But it is that consistency and trust building, open communication, trying to create environments where kids feel that they can come forward. That's the solution in the end. The sort of top last tip that I always share is that the biggest risk in the online world is when our children's relationships online are stronger than those offline. And if we can just focus on that one thing, it's building those relationships with them, that trust, that credibility at times, and the willingness to have that open conversation with a curious mindset.
Amazing. Well, Yaz, I better go because I need to get my kids off their screens now. So thank you again. And I definitely feel like we are all in this together. So thanks, everybody, and look forward to seeing you again at one of our upcoming webinars. Thanks so much. And thank you again, Yaz. Amazing.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Belle. Have a great night, everyone.